The desperate meeting. Elena Rodriguez clutched the leather portfolio containing her father's medical bills as she stood outside the gleaming towers of Cross Enterprises. The Manhattan skyscraper stretched toward the clouds like a monument to wealth and power, everything her life in Queens was not. At 27, she had inherited nothing from her father except his crushing debt, $200,000 in hospital bills that haunted her dreams and consumed her waking hours. The elevator ride to the 45th floor felt like ascending to another planet. Elena smoothed her secondhand blazer and tried to project confidence she didn't feel. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled below like a glittering circuit board, beautiful and impossibly distant from her world of overdue rent and ramen dinners. "Miss Rodriguez?" The receptionist's voice was crisp and professional. "Mr. Cross will see you now." Elena's heart hammered as she walked through corridors lined with abstract art worth more than her annual income. She'd expected to meet with an accountant or collections manager, not the CEO himself. Sebastian Cross had agreed to this meeting personally, and Elena couldn't fathom why. The office door opened to reveal a space that breathed power and control. Sebastian Cross stood with his back to her, silhouetted against windows that framed Manhattan like a personal kingdom. When he turned, Elena's breath caught in her throat. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 34, with dark hair that suggested discipline and green eyes that seemed to see through every defense she'd built. His charcoal suit fit him like armor, and when he moved, it was with the fluid precision of someone accustomed to commanding any room he entered. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying warmth that surprised her. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Elena perched on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than her car. "Mr. Cross, I appreciate you seeing me personally. I know you're busy, and this is just a small account." $200,000 isn't small to most people," Sebastian interrupted gently, settling behind his desk, "especially to someone working 3 jobs to make minimum payments." Heat flooded Elena's cheeks. He'd researched her financial situation thoroughly. "I'm not here to make excuses. I want to arrange a payment plan that actually works, something that doesn't take 40 years to complete." Sebastian studied her with those penetrating green eyes, and Elena felt exposed in ways that had nothing to do with money. "Tell me about your art." The question caught her off guard. "My what?" "You're a painter. Your Instagram shows remarkable talent, abstract pieces with emotional depth that's quite rare." Sebastian leaned forward slightly. "What inspires you?" "I don't understand what this has to do with debt negotiation," Elena said carefully. "Humor me." Elena hesitated, then found herself speaking truth she rarely shared. Pain, mostly. Loss. The way grief changes color and texture depending on the light. My father's illness taught me that suffering has its own palette, not just black and gray, but purples so deep they seem to absorb light, and golds so thin they're almost transparent. Something shifted in Sebastian's expression, a crack in his professional composure. "You paint grief." "I paint rhino." Elena lifted her chin defensively. "It's not marketable, but it's honest." Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. When he spoke again, his words changed everything. "I'm going to make you an offer, Elena. Not a payment plan, but a proposition that could eliminate your debt entirely." Elena's pulse spiked. "What kind of proposition?" "I need a partner," Sebastian said simply, and that single word rewrote the entire trajectory of Elena's life. Not a business partner, but a personal one. Someone to accompany me to social events, family gatherings, investor dinners. Someone who can hold her own in conversation but isn't performing for personal gain. "You want me to pay me to be your girlfriend?" Elena asked, her voice sharper than intended. "I want you to pay you to be yourself," Sebastian corrected. "For 6 months. In exchange, your father's debt disappears completely." Elena stared at him, trying to process an offer that sounded too good to be true and too strange to be false. "Why me? You could have any woman in New York. Sebastian's smile was slight but genuine, because any woman in New York would be trying to become Mrs. Sebastian Cross. You just want to honor your father's memory and create art. That kind of authenticity is rarer than you might think. As Elena sat in that pristine office, surrounded by wealth she'd never imagined touching, she realized that Sebastian Cross hadn't just offered to erase her debt. He'd offered to step into a world where everything she thought she knew about herself would be tested. 6 months, she repeated slowly. 6 months, Sebastian confirmed. And Elena, you might discover that some transactions are far more worth than money.
"Who is she to you?" Sophia asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We were business partners when I first started Titan. We also dated for about a year. It ended badly when she tried to force a buyout of my shares. I discovered she'd been working with competitors, sharing proprietary information. I had to cut all ties, business and personal." "She seems to think she still has some claim on you," Sophia observed. "She thinks a lot of things that aren't true," Marcus replied. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense in the moonlight. "Sophia, I need to tell you something. I've been trying to find the right moment for months, but there never seems to be a perfect time." Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs. "What is it?" "I'm attracted to you," Marcus said, the words tumbling out as if he'd been holding them back too long. "I have been for years, but you're my assistant, and I never wanted to make you uncomfortable or put you in a position where you felt pressured. So I kept my distance, kept things professional. But tonight, seeing you like this, seeing the real you finally stepping out of those shadows you've been hiding in, I can't pretend anymore. I don't want to be your boss. I want to be the man who makes you smile, who earns the right to hold your hand, who gets to know all the parts of yourself you've been keeping hidden." Sophia's breath caught. "Marcus, you don't have to say anything right now. I just needed you to know. Whatever you decide, your job is safe. Nothing changes unless you want it to." For 6 years, Sophia had imagined this moment, but in her fantasies, she'd always been brave, confident, ready. Now, faced with the reality of Marcus's confession, she felt paralyzed by fear and hope in equal measure. Then she remembered why she'd worn this dress, why she'd let Isabella transform her appearance. She was tired of being invisible. "I've had feelings for you since my 2nd month at Titan. I've spent 6 years hiding them because I was terrified of losing you, even just as my boss. But tonight, when I put on this dress, I decided I was tired of being afraid." Marcus's eyes widened, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. "You mean—" Instead of answering, Sophia closed the distance between them and kissed him. The complications. The kiss was everything Sophia had imagined and nothing like she'd expected. His lips were warm and sure, his hands gentle as they cupped her face. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, he rested his forehead against hers. "That was worth 6 years of waiting," he murmured. They stayed on the terrace for another hour, talking about everything they'd never been able to say before. Marcus confessed he'd nearly asked her out a dozen times. Sophia admitted she'd memorized the way he took his coffee, not because she was efficient, but because she'd loved having that small connection to him. But Monday morning brought reality crashing back in. Photos from the gala had appeared in 3 different tech blogs, all showing Marcus and Sophia on the terrace, clearly intimate. By 9 o'clock, Sophia's desk phone was ringing with calls from curious colleagues. By 10, she'd been summoned to an emergency board meeting. She sat in the conference room surrounded by Titan's board members, feeling exposed in her usual beige cardigan. The chairman, Robert Hayes, looked at Sophia with barely concealed disapproval. "Miss Reynolds, we need to discuss your relationship with Mr. Drake. As I'm sure you're aware, fraternization between executives and their direct reports creates significant liability for the company. I understand your concern, Sophia replied, keeping her voice steady. However, my relationship with Marcus, Mr. Drake, began outside of work hours and has not affected my performance or judgment. That's not for you to determine, another board member interjected. The optics alone are problematic. It appears you may have received preferential treatment. Marcus, who had been sitting silently at the head of the table, finally spoke. If we're discussing preferential treatment, let's examine the facts. Sophia has increased my productivity by 40%, streamlined our entire executive operations department, and saved the company approximately $12 million through her vendor negotiations. Her performance reviews have been exemplary for 6 consecutive years. If anything, I've been underutilizing her talents by keeping her in an assistant role, which is why I'm recommending she be promoted to Vice President of Operations, effective immediately. She'll report directly to Richard Chen instead of me, eliminating any conflict of interest. Her compensation will be commensurate with her actual contributions to this company, not her previous title. The room fell silent. Sophia stared at Marcus, shocked. They hadn't discussed this. That's highly irregular, Robert Hayes said slowly. So is letting someone of Sophia's caliber remain undervalued for 6 years. I'm putting it to a vote. All in favor. After a tense moment, Richard Chen raised his hand, then another board member, and another. By the time the votes were counted, Sophia's promotion had passed by a narrow margin. As the meeting adjourned, Victoria Caldwell, who had somehow secured a seat on the board during a recent shakeup, approached her with a cold smile. Congratulations on your promotion. I'm sure it had nothing to do with sleeping with the CEO. Actually, Sophia replied, meeting her gaze steadily, it has everything to do with 6 years of exceptional work that you would have noticed if you spent more time focusing on business and less time creating drama. That evening, Sophia and Marcus met at his penthouse apartment overlooking the bay. She had been there before for work, but this time felt different. This time, she was there as his equal, his partner. You didn't have to do that. The promotion. I don't want people thinking. Let them think whatever they want, Marcus interrupted, pulling her into his arms. You earned that position 10 times over. I should have promoted you years ago, but I was too worried about how it would look, about complicating our working relationship. I won't make that mistake again. He kissed her gently, then more deeply, and Sophia felt herself melting into his embrace. For the first time in 6 years, she wasn't hiding anything. The new beginning. 6 months later, Sophia stood in her corner office at Titan Industries, reviewing quarterly reports. Through her windows, she could see Marcus's office down the hall, close enough to feel connected, far enough to maintain professional boundaries. The transition to VP of Operations had been challenging. She'd faced skepticism from colleagues who assumed she'd slept her way to the top, weathered passive-aggressive comments from Victoria at every board meeting, and worked twice as hard as necessary to prove herself. But she'd also closed the largest partnership deal in Titan's history, restructured their entire supply chain, and earned grudging respect from even her harshest critics. Her relationship with Marcus had deepened into something real and lasting. They'd learned to separate work from personal life, to support each other without crossing professional lines, to be partners in every sense of the word. He'd met her family at Thanksgiving. She'd accompanied him to his mother's birthday dinner. They'd taken a weekend trip to Napa where they'd talked about the future in terms of we instead of I. Tonight was the annual Titan Industries Gala, and for the first time, Sophia felt no anxiety about attending. She'd chosen her own dress, a sophisticated emerald green that made her eyes shine. No more hiding, no more pretending to be invisible. Marcus picked her up at 7, looking devastating in his tuxedo. But it was the way he looked at her, with pride and love and unguarded affection, that made her feel truly beautiful. Ready? He asked, offering his arm. Absolutely, Sophia replied.
The gala was held at the Riverside Manor, where everything had changed 6 months ago. As they walked in together, Sophia noticed the difference in how people reacted. There were no shocked stares this time, only respectful nods and genuine smiles. She'd earned her place here through her work, her competence, her undeniable value to the company. Midway through the evening, Marcus led her outside to the terrace where they'd first kissed. The San Francisco night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. "I wanted to bring you back here because this is where my life changed, where I finally stopped being afraid and told you the truth." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sophia's breath caught as he dropped to one knee. "Sophia Reynolds, you've challenged me, inspired me, and shown me what it means to truly partner with someone who matches my ambition and exceeds my expectations. You stepped out of the shadows and changed everything, not just for me, but for everyone who gets to work with the real you. You're brilliant, brave, and the best decision I never knew I was making when I hired you 6 years ago." He opened the box to reveal a stunning sapphire ring surrounded by diamonds, the deep blue reminiscent of the dress she'd worn that first night. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life being worthy of the woman who was brave enough to emerge from hiding and show me who she really was?" Tears streamed down Sophia's face as she nodded. "Yes."